The day started like any other, but for Emily Carter and Daniel Hughes it was special. It was their wedding day, the day they had dreamed of since they first met 3 years ago. They woke up early that morning, both feeling nervous but excited. Emily looked out of her bedroom window, watching the sun rise over the quiet neighborhood. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, and she couldn't help but think how beautiful everything seemed. Today would be the start of something new, something wonderful. Daniel, meanwhile, was pacing in his own home across town. His best friend Alex tried to calm him down. "Relax," Alex said with a laugh. "You're not going to trip during the ceremony or forget your vows." Daniel forced a smile, but inside, he felt jittery. He kept thinking about all the little things that could go wrong, even though deep down he knew today would be perfect. After all, nothing could ruin this moment, not when he was marrying the love of his life. By mid-morning, everyone gathered at the small chapel on the outskirts of Chicago. It wasn't a grand building, just a modest structure nestled among tall trees whose leaves were turning shades of gold and red. The chapel had a cozy feel to it, with its wooden pews and stained glass windows. A gentle breeze carried the scent of fallen leaves, mixing with the faint aroma of flowers arranged near the entrance. Emily arrived in a car decorated with ribbons and balloons. She stepped out slowly, her heart racing as she caught sight of herself in the reflection of the car window. Her white dress flowed gracefully around her, and her veil sparkled under the soft sunlight. For a moment she felt like she was floating rather than walking. Her father stood beside her, offering his arm. "Ready?" he asked softly. Emily nodded, though her voice caught in her throat. Inside the chapel, Daniel waited anxiously at the altar. He fidgeted with his tie, glancing toward the doors every few seconds. When Emily finally appeared, walking down the aisle with her father, Daniel's breath caught. She looked breathtaking, more beautiful than he had ever imagined. As their eyes met, all his nerves melted away. This was it, the beginning of forever. The ceremony itself was short but heartfelt. The priest spoke kind words about love and commitment, and then it was time for the vows. Emily's hands trembled slightly as she held onto the bouquet, but her voice was steady as she promised to stand by Daniel through thick and thin. Daniel, too, spoke with conviction, his eyes never leaving hers. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, the room erupted in applause. Friends and family cheered, some wiping away tears of happiness. Afterward, the newlyweds walked back, down the aisle together, hand in hand. Emily laughed as someone threw confetti, the colorful pieces fluttering around them like tiny fireworks. Outside, they paused for photographs, posing beneath the vibrant autumn trees. Emily leaned into Daniel, resting her head on his shoulder. "I can't believe this is real," she whispered. Daniel kissed her forehead, promising that their life together would be just as magical as this day. As the photo session wrapped up, guests began moving toward the reception venue nearby. It was a quaint hall adorned with fairy lights and fresh flowers. Tables were set with crisp linens and elegant centerpieces. Music played softly in the background as people mingled and enjoyed hors d'oeuvres. Emily and Daniel made their entrance, greeted by loud cheers and applause once again. They took their seats at the head table, basking in the warmth of their loved ones' smiles. Their first dance came next. Under the twinkling lights, they swayed gently to the music, completely lost in each other's embrace. Emily rested her cheek against Daniel's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. She felt safe, content, like nothing bad could ever touch her here. Around them, guests watched fondly, snapping pictures and whispering compliments about how perfect the couple looked together. But amidst the laughter and joy, something strange lingered in the air. At first it was barely noticeable, a faint hum almost like static electricity. Emily noticed it while chatting with one of her bridesmaids. She tilted her head slightly, trying to pinpoint the source, but it faded as quickly as it had come. Shrugging it off, she returned to the conversation. Daniel also sensed something unusual, though he couldn't quite put his finger on it. Some of the guests seemed distant, their expressions blank despite the lively atmosphere. One man repeated the same phrase twice in a row without realizing it, causing Daniel to pause mid-sentence. Was he imagining things? No, surely not. He shook his head, deciding it was probably just fatigue catching up to him. Still, the feeling gnawed at the edges of his mind. As the evening wore on, Emily grew quieter, occasionally glancing around the room with a puzzled expression. Even the food, which should have been delicious, tasted oddly bland to her. She pushed her plate aside, telling herself she was simply too full to eat anymore. Eventually, the newlyweds decided to leave the party early. They wanted to spend some time alone before heading off on their honeymoon. Saying quick goodbyes to a few lingering friends, they slipped out of the venue unnoticed. The cool night air hit them as soon as they stepped outside, refreshing after hours spent indoors. Emily shivered slightly, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. As they walked toward the car, Daniel reached for Emily's hand, squeezing it gently. "Today was amazing," he said, his voice filled with emotion. Emily smiled, nodding in agreement. But behind her smile, a shadow of unease lingered. Something about tonight felt off. She didn't know what it was yet, but deep down she suspected their happily ever after might not unfold quite as smoothly as they had hoped. The drive away from the reception was quiet at first. Emily stared out the window, watching the trees blur past in the darkness. She tried to focus on the happy moments of the day, the ceremony, the laughter, the dancing. But something kept tugging at the back of her mind. That strange hum she'd noticed earlier hadn't gone away. It was still there, faint but persistent, like a distant buzzing that refused to fade. Daniel seemed distracted too. He gripped the steering wheel tightly, glancing occasionally at the rearview mirror. "Did you hear that?" he asked suddenly, his voice tense. "Hear what?" Emily replied, turning to look at him. "That noise," Daniel said, frowning. "Like static or something." Emily hesitated. She didn't want to admit it, but she had heard it too. Instead of answering, she leaned forward, adjusting the radio dial in hopes of finding some music to distract them. But no matter which station she tuned to, all she got was static. Loud, crackling static that made her ears hurt. Frustrated, she turned the radio off completely. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. They drove for another 10 minutes, the road growing, quieter and more desolate. There were no other cars, no signs of life anywhere, just the endless stretch of pavement flanked by dense woods. Then, without warning, Daniel slowed the car to a stop. "What's wrong?" Emily asked, sitting up straighter. "I don't know," Daniel muttered, squinting through the windshield. "Look." Ahead, along the side of the road, stood dozens of people. They weren't moving much, just standing there silently, staring into space. Some held hands, others simply gazed ahead with empty expressions. Their clothes looked normal enough, jeans, jackets, dresses, but there was something deeply unsettling about them. None of them acknowledged the car or showed any sign of awareness. Emily's heart began to race. "Who are they? What are they doing out here?" "I have no idea," Daniel said, his voice tight. He rolled down his window slightly, calling out, "Is everything okay? Does anyone need help?" There was no response, not even a flicker of recognition. One man standing closest to the car tilted his head slightly, his movements unnervingly slow. His eyes locked onto Daniel's, and for a moment, Daniel froze. Those eyes, they weren't normal. They were glassy, vacant, like windows into nothingness. "This isn't right," Daniel whispered, rolling the window back up. "We should go." But before he could shift the car into gear, Emily gasped. "Dan, look." One of the figures, a woman this time, had stepped closer to the car. Her face was pale, almost translucent, and her lips curled into a smile that sent chills down Emily's spine. And then, without warning, her mouth opened wide, impossibly wide. Rows of sharp, jagged teeth gleamed in the dim light. Both Emily and Daniel screamed. Daniel slammed his foot on the accelerator, jerking the car forward. The tires screeched as they sped away, leaving the eerie scene behind. Neither of them spoke for several minutes, their breathing ragged and uneven. Finally, Emily broke the silence. What was that? She stammered, clutching her shawl tightly around her shoulders. I don't know, Daniel admitted, gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. But we're not stopping again until we get to the hotel. The rest of the drive passed in tense silence. When they finally arrived at the hotel, they parked hurriedly and rushed inside, avoiding eye contact with anyone else. The lobby was empty except for a sleepy-looking clerk behind the counter. He handed them their room key without saying much, barely glancing up from his phone. Once in their room, they bolted the door shut and leaned against it, trying to catch their breath. That was insane, Emily said, sinking onto the edge of the bed. What did we just see? I don't know, Daniel repeated, running a hand through his hair. But I think we need to figure it out. For the next hour, they took turns searching online for answers. Emily scrolled through news articles and social media posts, looking for anything unusual happening in the area. All she found were vague rumors, cryptic forum threads about the signal and warnings not to trust anyone acting strangely. Some users claimed people were disappearing. Others described encounters with blank-faced strangers. None of it made sense. Meanwhile, Daniel called his brother, hoping for reassurance. The phone rang several times before going to voicemail. He tried again, but the call wouldn't connect. Something wasn't right. Even the Wi-Fi in the hotel seemed spotty, cutting out intermittently. As the night wore on, exhaustion began to set in. Emily lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling while Daniel paced nervously. Maybe we're overreacting, she said quietly. It could have been a prank or, I don't know, some kind of performance art. Performance art doesn't explain those teeth, Daniel shot back, or the way they moved, or how none of them reacted when I called out. Emily didn't argue. She knew he was right. Whatever they had seen, it wasn't human, or at least not entirely human anymore. Just as they were debating whether to leave town or stay put until morning, there was a knock at the door. Both of them froze. Who is it? Daniel called out cautiously. Hotel security, came the muffled reply. Just checking on your safety. Daniel exchanged a worried glance with Emily. We didn't ask for anyone to check on us, he whispered. Slowly, he approached the peephole and peeked outside. Standing in the hallway was a man in a uniform, his cap pulled low over his face. He wasn't moving. He just stood there waiting patiently. Daniel's stomach churned. Something about the man's posture felt wrong, unnatural. He's one of them. Daniel breathed, stepping away from the door. Emily sat up, panic rising in her chest. What do we do? We can't stay here, Daniel decided quickly. Grabbing their bags, they slipped out of the room through a side exit, avoiding the lobby entirely. Outside, the streets were eerily quiet. The same oppressive stillness hung in the air, broken only by the sound of their footsteps echoing against the pavement. As they walked, more of those blank-faced individuals appeared, wandering aimlessly or standing motionless. Each encounter sent fresh waves of terror coursing through them. Every step felt heavier than the last, as though the air itself resisted their movement. Emily stumbled, gasping for breath, and noticed her skin beginning to pale unnaturally. Daniel helped her up, his own strength waning. They realized then that whatever was happening wasn't random. It was following them, hunting them. And yet, despite their fear, they pressed on. They had to find answers. They had to survive. Because deep down, they both knew their wedding day wasn't just the start of their happily ever after. It was the beginning of something far darker and far more dangerous. Emily and Daniel stumbled into the library, their hearts pounding as they pushed the heavy wooden doors shut behind them. They leaned against the doors for a moment, catching their breath. Outside, the streets had been eerily silent. But inside the library, it was even quieter, so quiet that every tiny sound seemed amplified. The creak of the floorboards beneath their feet echoed through the vast space, making them flinch. The library was old, its shelves lined with dusty books that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. A faint smell of mildew hung in the air, mixing with the mustiness of aged paper. Moonlight streamed through cracked windows, casting long, jagged shadows across the room. It felt like stepping into another world, one far removed from the chaos outside. We need answers, Daniel said finally, breaking the silence. His voice sounded loud in the stillness, startling both of them. There has to be something here that can explain what's going on. Emily nodded, though her hands trembled as she tightened her grip on the strap of her bag. She glanced around nervously, half expecting one of those blank-faced figures to appear out of nowhere, but the library seemed deserted, for now. They split up to cover more ground, each heading down different aisles of towering bookshelves. Emily ran her fingers along the spines of the books, reading titles aloud under her breath. Most were about history or science, nothing that seemed particularly useful. Then, tucked away in a corner, she found something unusual, a thick leather-bound journal. Its cover was cracked and faded, but when she opened it, the pages inside were filled with handwritten notes and sketches. "Daniel," she called softly, clutching the journal to her chest. He hurried over, his face pale but determined. Together they sat at a nearby table, spreading the journal out between them. The writing was messy, almost frantic, as if whoever had written it was in a hurry. Some parts were crossed out while others were circled repeatedly. There were diagrams too, sketches of machines, symbols, and what looked like human brains connected to wires. One phrase caught Emily's eye. "The signal." "What does this mean?" she asked, pointing to the words. Daniel leaned closer, squinting at the cramped handwriting. "It talks about experiments," he said slowly. "Experiments involving mind control and something called alien frequencies." He paused, his brow furrowing. "Listen to this. Exposure to certain signals can rewrite human consciousness, turning victims into puppets. Do you think that's what happened to those people we saw?" Emily shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. "It sounds crazy, but yeah, I think it might be. Whatever's happening, it's not natural." As they flipped through the pages, they discovered more details. According to the journal, the experiments had started decades ago, conducted in secret by a group trying to harness alien technology. The goal had been to create soldiers who could follow orders without question, but things had gone horribly wrong. Instead of obedient soldiers, the subjects became hosts for something else, something intelligent and malevolent. "This doesn't make sense," Emily whispered, shaking her head. "Why would anyone do this? And why is it happening now?" "I don't know," Daniel admitted, frustration creeping into his voice. "But there's got to be a reason we're caught up in this. We didn't just stumble onto this by accident." Before they could discuss it further, Daniel noticed a computer sitting on a desk nearby. It was old, with a bulky monitor and a keyboard that looked like it belonged in the 90s. Still, it was worth a shot. He powered it on, waiting impatiently as the screen flickered to life. The desktop appeared cluttered with files and folders, many of which were password protected. Daniel clicked on one labeled Project Echo, only to be met with a series of error messages. Frustrated, he tried again, typing random passwords until the system finally gave him access. What he found made his blood run cold. The folder contained documents detailing recent tests involving the same alien frequencies mentioned in the journal. Photos showed people hooked up to strange devices, their expressions vacant and lifeless. Notes described how the signal spread quickly once activated, infecting anyone within range. "There's more," Daniel said grimly, scrolling through the files. "It says here that the signal targets specific individuals first, people who are emotionally vulnerable or recently exposed to intense emotions, like a wedding." Emily froze, her eyes widening. "That's us," she breathed. "We were targeted. Our wedding wasn't random, it was planned." The realization hit them like a punch to the gut. Everything, the ceremony, the reception, the eerie events afterward, it all fit together. Now someone or something had orchestrated it to ensure they were exposed to the signal. And judging by the information in front of them, they weren't the only ones. "We need to stop it," Emily said suddenly, her voice firm despite the fear in her eyes. "If this thing keeps spreading, it'll take over everyone. We have to find where it's coming from." Daniel nodded, though doubt lingered in his expression. "Even if we figure it out, how are we supposed to fight something like this? We're just us." We don't have a choice, Emily replied, standing up. If we don't try, no one will. They gathered what they could from the library, a few printed pages, a map marked with locations related to the project, and prepared to leave. As they reached the door, however, the lights flickered overhead, plunging the room into darkness. Emily gasped, gripping Daniel's arm tightly. "Stay close," he murmured, pulling out his phone to use as a flashlight. The beam of light cut through the gloom, revealing shapes moving in the shadows. At first they thought it was just their imagination, but then they heard it, a low, guttural hum, growing louder with each passing second. "They're here," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. Sure enough, figures began emerging from between the bookshelves, their movements jerky and unnatural. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dark, locking onto Emily and Daniel with terrifying precision. "Run!" Daniel shouted, grabbing Emily's hand. They bolted for the exit, dodging chairs and tables as the creatures closed in. The library seemed endless, the aisles stretching impossibly long as if the building itself was working against them. Just as they reached the doors, one of the figures lunged, its mouth opening wide to reveal rows of razor-sharp teeth. Daniel shoved Emily aside, slamming the door shut before it could reach them. They collapsed against the wall outside, gasping for air. "That was too close," Emily panted, tears streaming down her face. "What do we do now?" Daniel looked at her, determination hardening his features. "We keep going. We find the source of the signal and destroy it, no matter what." Though neither of them knew exactly how or if they would succeed, they couldn't give up. Not yet. Because deep down, they understood the truth. Stopping the signal wasn't just about saving themselves. It was about saving everyone else too. Emily and Daniel raced back toward the chapel, their hearts pounding as they pieced together what they had learned in the library. The map they had taken showed several locations marked as potential sources of the signal. But one stood out, the small church where they had gotten married earlier that day. It wasn't just coincidence, it was the epicenter. The streets were eerily quiet now, almost abandoned. The blank-faced figures they had encountered earlier seemed to have vanished, replaced by an unsettling stillness. Even the wind had died down, leaving the air thick and heavy, like the calm before a storm. Every step felt harder than the last, as though invisible forces were working against them. When they finally reached the chapel, the building looked different somehow. Its once welcoming facade now appeared sinister under the pale moonlight. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the windows, and the faint hum they had heard earlier was louder here, vibrating through their bones. "This is it," Daniel whispered, gripping Emily's hand tightly. "Whatever's causing this, it's inside." They pushed open the heavy wooden door, wincing as it creaked loudly in the silence. The interior of the chapel was darker than they remembered, the stained glass windows casting distorted colors onto the floor. The pews were empty, but there was a strange energy in the air, an oppressive weight that made it hard to breathe. "Where do we start?" Emily asked, her voice barely audible. Daniel pointed toward a narrow staircase leading downward. "The basement. If there's something hidden here, that's where it'll be." They descended carefully, each step groaning beneath their weight. At the bottom, they found themselves in a cramped, cluttered space filled with old machinery and tangled wires. In the center of the room sat a crystalline device glowing softly with an unnatural light. It pulsed rhythmically like a heartbeat, casting strange shadows on the walls. Emily approached cautiously, her eyes fixed on the device. She recognized the symbols etched into its surface. They matched the ones from the journal they had found in the library. "This is it," she murmured. "This is the source of the signal." Daniel stepped forward, holding up the chair he'd brought with him. "If we destroy this thing, maybe we can stop it." But as he moved closer, the air around them began to shimmer. A high-pitched whine filled the room, growing louder with each passing second. Emily clutched her ears, wincing in pain. "What's happening?" she shouted over the noise. "I don't know," Daniel yelled back, hesitating. The device's glow intensified, bathing the room in an eerie blue light. Suddenly, the shadows along the walls shifted and figures emerged from the darkness. They weren't human, not anymore. Their eyes glowed red, and their mouths hung open impossibly wide, revealing rows of sharp teeth. "They're here," Emily gasped, backing away. Daniel raised the chair defensively, but the creatures didn't attack. Instead, they surrounded the device, forming a loose circle. One of them stepped forward, its movements jerky and mechanical. It tilted its head, studying Emily and Daniel with cold, calculating eyes. "You cannot escape," it said in a monotone voice devoid of emotion. "You have been chosen." "Chosen for what?" Daniel demanded, his voice shaking. "The signal requires hosts," the creature replied. "Your emotions, your connection, make you ideal candidates. Resistance is futile." Emily's mind raced. She remembered the notes in the journal, how the signal targeted people who were emotionally vulnerable. Her wedding day had been the perfect setup, a way to ensure she and Daniel were exposed without realizing it. "No," she said firmly, stepping in front of Daniel. "We won't let you control us." The creature smirked. Or at least, it tried to. The expression looked wrong on its face, twisted and unnatural. "It is already too late," it said. "The process has begun." As if on cue, a searing pain shot through Emily's head, making her cry out. She stumbled, clutching her temples, as images flashed before her eyes, fragmented memories of the day jumbled and distorted. Beside her, Daniel collapsed to his knees, gritting his teeth against the agony. "We have to destroy it," Emily screamed, forcing herself to move despite the pain. She grabbed a loose pipe from the floor and lunged toward the device, swinging with all her strength. The impact sent sparks flying, but the crystal remained intact, its glow flickering briefly before returning stronger than ever. Daniel joined her, smashing the chair against the machine. Again and again they attacked, ignoring the burning sensation, spreading through their bodies. But no matter how hard they tried, the device refused to break. "It's not working," Daniel shouted, desperation creeping into his voice. "What do we do?" Emily glanced around frantically, searching for anything that might help. Her eyes landed on a panel on the wall, partially hidden behind a pile of crates. "Over there," she yelled, pointing. "Maybe we can cut the power." They sprinted toward the panel, dodging the advancing creatures. Daniel tore it open, revealing a tangle of wires and switches. Without hesitation, he yanked at the largest wire, pulling it free. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the lights in the basement flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. The humming stopped. For a brief instant, relief washed over them. Had they done it? Had they stopped the signal? But then the device flared to life again, brighter and more intense than before. The creatures let out a collective shriek, their voices merging into a deafening roar. Emily and Daniel covered their ears, stumbling backward as the pain in their heads intensified. "You cannot stop it," one of the creatures hissed, its red eyes gleaming in the darkness. "You are part of it now." Emily realized with horror that they were right. The signal wasn't just external, it was inside them, rewriting their thoughts, erasing their identities piece by piece. She could feel it taking hold, pulling her deeper into its grasp. Tears streamed down her face as she reached for Daniel, their fingers brushing briefly before the world around them dissolved into chaos. The last thing Emily saw was Daniel's terrified expression, his lips moving soundlessly as he called her name. Then everything went black. When they woke, they were no longer themselves. Their minds were gone, replaced by something else, something alien. They stood side by side, blank-faced and unblinking, staring ahead with glowing red eyes. The device pulsed steadily in the center of the room, its work complete. Outside, the streets came alive with movement as more people fell under the signal's control. One by one, their humanity slipped away, leaving only shells behind. The invasion had begun, and there was no stopping it now. In the end, Emily and Daniel hadn't been able to fight back. They had been chosen, and they had lost. Emily and Daniel stood motionless, their bodies no longer their own. The warmth that had once filled their hearts, the love they shared, was gone, replaced by cold emptiness. They were no longer human, not really. Their minds had been rewritten, overwritten by the alien signal that now controlled every thought, every movement. They were puppets, hollow shells directed by an unseen force. The basement where it had all happened was silent now, save for the steady hum of the crystalline device. Its glow pulsed rhythmically like a heartbeat, as if it were alive. Around them, the other creatures, the ones who had once been people, began to shuffle out of the room, heading upstairs and into the night. Emily and Daniel followed without question, their steps synchronized, their expressions blank. Outside, the world had changed. Streets that had been bustling with life just hours earlier were now eerily quiet. Cars sat abandoned in the middle of intersections, their headlights still on but dimming as their batteries drained. Storefront windows were dark, shattered in places, and the air carried a strange metallic tang. It was as though the entire town had been frozen in time, its inhabitants stripped of their humanity. As Emily and Daniel walked, they noticed more of the possessed individuals emerging from buildings and alleys. Some wandered aimlessly, while others gathered in groups standing silently as though waiting for instructions. None spoke, none reacted to their surroundings. They were merely extensions of the signal, carrying out its will without resistance. Despite their lack of control, fragments of memory occasionally surfaced in Emily's mind, glimpses of her old life before the invasion. She remembered laughing with Daniel during their first dance, the way his hand felt warm in hers. She remembered the excitement she'd felt waking up on her wedding day, the hope that this would be the start of something beautiful. But those memories were fleeting, slipping away like sand through her fingers. Each time they surfaced, the signal pushed them back down, burying them beneath layers of programming. Daniel, too, experienced flashes of his former self. He remembered promising Emily that their life together would be magical, vowing to protect her no matter what. But those promises meant nothing now. His emotions were locked away, inaccessible, leaving behind only obedience to the signal. As they moved through the deserted streets, Emily caught sight of a reflection in a storefront window. For a brief moment, she saw herself as she used to be, young, vibrant, full of life. Then the image shifted, revealing the person she had become. Pale, hollow-eyed, with an unnatural red glow emanating from her pupils. She stopped walking, staring at the reflection in disbelief. Beside her, Daniel paused as well, tilting his head slightly as though sensing her hesitation. "Keep moving," came a voice, not spoken aloud but transmitted directly into their minds. It was calm, commanding, impossible to disobey. Emily turned away from the window and continued forward, her steps mechanical once again. They reached the town square where dozens of others had already gathered. The possessed individuals formed loose clusters, swaying slightly as though caught in a trance. Above them, the sky shimmered faintly, ripples of energy spreading outward like waves. The source of the signal wasn't just in the basement of the chapel. It was everywhere now, permeating the air, infecting anyone within range. Emily and Daniel joined the crowd, standing side by side as the signal pulsed through them. They could feel it probing their minds, searching for any remnants of resistance. When it found none, it began feeding them new information, coordinates, destinations, objectives. They weren't sure what the signal wanted them to do, but they didn't need to understand. All they needed to do was obey. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. Time seemed irrelevant now. The signal kept them rooted in place, holding them there until it decided it was time to move again. When the command finally came, the crowd dispersed, splitting off into smaller groups. Emily and Daniel remained together, heading toward the outskirts of town. The farther they traveled, the more evident the spread of the signal became. Houses along the way were dark, their occupants either missing or transformed. Occasionally, they encountered stragglers, people who hadn't yet succumbed to the signal. These individuals screamed and ran when they saw the approaching figures, but escape was futile. The signal reached them long before they could get far, pulling them into its grasp and erasing their identities. By dawn, Emily and Daniel had reached the edge of the forest surrounding the town. Here the trees loomed tall and ominous, their branches twisted and bare. A narrow dirt path led deeper into the woods, vanishing into shadows. Without hesitation, they followed it, their feet crunching softly against the leaves littering the ground. The forest was eerily silent, devoid of birdsong or rustling wildlife. Even the wind seemed absent, leaving the air heavy and oppressive. As they ventured further, they began to notice strange structures hidden among the trees, metal towers covered in wires and antennae. These devices pulsed faintly, emitting low-frequency vibrations that resonated in their chests. Emily realized these were relay stations, amplifiers designed to extend the signal's reach. With each station they passed, the hum in the air grew louder, more overwhelming. By the time they reached a clearing, the noise was almost unbearable, pressing against their skulls like a vice. In the center of the clearing stood another crystalline device, larger and more intricate than the one in the chapel. This one was surrounded by a ring of humanoid figures, their red eyes glowing brighter than ever. Emily and Daniel joined the circle, taking their places without prompting. The signal surged through them, stronger than before, filling their minds with images and commands. Through the haze of programming, Emily glimpsed the truth. The signal wasn't just rewriting human consciousness, it was building something vast and incomprehensible. The devices scattered throughout the forest were nodes in a network, connecting to create a massive construct. Whatever the signal intended to build, it required hosts, thousands, perhaps millions of them to function. And Emily and Daniel were part of it now. Their role was unclear, but it didn't matter. They couldn't fight back, couldn't resist. The signal had taken everything from them, their free will, their memories, their humanity. All that remained was a hollow shell, waiting to serve its purpose. As the sun rose over the horizon, casting pale light over the clearing, the signal issued its final command. The crystalline device flared brightly, releasing a burst of energy that rippled outward in all directions. Emily and Daniel fell to their knees, overwhelmed by the intensity of the surge. Their bodies convulsed as the signal completed its takeover, erasing the last traces of who they had once been. When the light faded, they stood again, fully assimilated. Their eyes glowed brighter, their movements smoother, more coordinated. They turned and began walking back toward the town, ready to carry out the next phase of the signal's plan. Behind them, the forest remained silent, its secrets hidden beneath layers of alien technology. The invasion had begun, and there was no stopping it now. Emily and Daniel were no longer victims. They were instruments, tools of a greater power that sought to reshape the world in its image. And as they disappeared into the trees, the hum of the signal lingered, a constant reminder that humanity's time was running out. The days that followed felt endless, though time no longer held any meaning for Emily and Daniel. Their lives were now dictated by the signal, a relentless hum that pulsed through their minds, guiding every step they took. They moved through the world not as individuals but as parts of a greater machine, working tirelessly to expand the reach of the alien construct. The towns nearby fell one by one, their inhabitants transformed into blank-faced hosts, streets emptied as people succumbed to the signal, their humanity stripped away until nothing remained but empty vessels. Cars sat abandoned on highways, homes stood silent with doors left open, and parks once filled with laughter became eerily still. The invasion spread outward like a wave, consuming everything in its path. Emily and Daniel played their roles without question. They traveled from place to place, setting up new relay stations in forests, fields, and cities. Each station was linked to the central crystalline device in the forest clearing, feeding energy into the growing network. With each new connection, the signal grew stronger, its influence spreading farther than before. Despite their lack of free will, fragments of their old selves occasionally surfaced, faint whispers buried beneath layers of programming. Emily would catch glimpses of her wedding dress, now tattered and stained, and feel a pang of something she couldn't quite name. Was it sadness? Regret? She couldn't be sure. The emotion flickered briefly before vanishing, crushed under the weight of the signal's control. Daniel, too, experienced fleeting moments of clarity. He remembered holding Emily's hand during their vows, promising to protect her no matter what. But those memories were distant now, distorted and unreachable. All he could focus on was the task at hand, the next relay station to build, the next group of humans to convert. As the network expanded, so did the crystalline structures themselves. What had started as small devices hidden in basements and forests grew into towering monoliths visible from miles away. These structures pulsed with energy, their glow illuminating the surrounding areas in an eerie green light. Beneath them, possessed individuals gathered, standing silently as though awaiting further instructions. One day, Emily and Daniel found themselves standing at the base of the largest structure yet. It rose high above the horizon, its surface shimmering with intricate patterns that shifted constantly. Around it, thousands of hosts formed concentric circles, their red eyes glowing brighter than ever. The air crackled with energy, making it hard to breathe. The signal pulsed through them, stronger than ever before. Images flooded their minds, visions of destruction, transformation, rebirth. They saw cities crumbling, forests overtaken by alien vegetation, oceans boiling away into steam. And then, rising from the ruins, a new world emerged, sterile, orderly, devoid of chaos or emotion. This was the signal's ultimate goal, to reshape Earth into a perfect reflection of itself. Emily and Daniel understood now, or rather, their programmed minds processed the information. They were no longer just tools, they were architects, building the foundation for this new reality. Every relay station, every converted human brought the signal closer to achieving its vision. But even as they worked, tiny seeds of resistance began to sprout within them. Deep in their subconscious, buried beneath layers of programming, their true selves fought to break free. For Emily, it started with a single thought. This isn't right. At first, it was so faint she barely noticed it. But over time, the thought grew louder, more insistent. She tried to suppress it, knowing the signal wouldn't tolerate disobedience, but it kept coming back, gnawing at the edges of her consciousness. Daniel experienced something similar. He began to dream. At least he thought they were dreams. In these fleeting moments, he saw flashes of his old life, laughing with Emily, planning their future, holding her close during quiet evenings. These images felt real, tangible, unlike the cold emptiness of his current existence. He wanted to cling to them, to hold on to whatever shred of humanity remained. The signal sensed their resistance and responded with overwhelming force. Pain surged through their minds, sharp and unrelenting as the alien presence tightened its grip. Memories were erased, emotions suppressed, thoughts rewritten. Yet despite its efforts, the resistance persisted, stubborn and unyielding. One night, as they stood beneath the towering crystalline structure, Emily turned to Daniel. Her movements were stiff and mechanical, but her eyes flickered, not red, but a brief flash of their natural color. "We have to stop it," she whispered, her voice barely audible. For a moment, Daniel didn't respond. Then slowly, his own eyes flickered, mirroring hers. "How?" he asked, his voice trembling. "I don't know," Emily admitted. "But we can't let it win." They knew the risks. If the signal detected their defiance, it would destroy them, or worse, erase them completely. But they also knew they couldn't keep living like this, robbed of their humanity and forced to serve a malevolent force. Something inside them refused to give up, even when all hope seemed lost. Working together, they devised a plan. Using their knowledge of the network, they identified a critical weakness in the central structure. If they could disable it, the entire system might collapse. It was a long shot, but it was their only chance. Under the cover of darkness, they approached the structure, moving cautiously to avoid drawing attention. The signal monitored everything, but its focus was divided among millions of hosts. If they acted quickly enough, they might slip past its notice. Reaching the base of the structure, they discovered a panel embedded in its surface. Inside, a tangle of wires and circuits glowed softly, pulsing in sync with the signal. Emily hesitated, her hands trembling as she reached for the wires. "What if this doesn't work?" she asked. "It has to," Daniel replied. his voice, firm despite the fear in his eyes. "We don't have another option." With a deep breath, Emily pulled at the largest wire, yanking it free. For a split second, nothing happened. Then the structure shuddered violently, its glow dimming as the hum in the air faltered. Alarms blared in their minds as the signal realized what was happening. "You cannot stop me," came a voice, loud and commanding. It wasn't spoken aloud but transmitted directly into their thoughts, shaking them to their core. "We already have," Emily said defiantly, pulling another wire. Beside her, Daniel worked frantically, tearing apart the circuitry. The structure began to destabilize, cracks forming along its surface as energy surged uncontrollably. Hosts nearby turned toward them, their red eyes locking onto Emily and Daniel. But they didn't attack. Instead, they froze, their bodies twitching as the signal lost its hold. And then, with a deafening roar, the structure collapsed, exploding in a burst of light that engulfed the area. Emily and Daniel shielded their faces, bracing for the end. When the light faded, they found themselves lying on the ground, gasping for air. The hum was gone, replaced by silence. Around them, the hosts blinked in confusion, their eyes returning to normal as the signal's influence faded. Emily sat up slowly, looking at Daniel. Tears streamed down her face as she reached for his hand. "We did it," she whispered. Daniel nodded, pulling her close. "We're free." But as they embraced, they realized the cost of their victory. The world around them was scarred, forever, changed by the invasion. Cities lay in ruins, forests were twisted and alien, and countless lives had been lost. The signal may have been destroyed, but its legacy remained. Still, they clung to each other, determined to rebuild. Together, they vowed to honor the humanity they had fought so hard to reclaim, and to ensure that no one else would suffer the way they had. In the distance, the sun rose over the horizon, casting golden light across the devastated landscape. It was a new beginning, fragile and uncertain but full of hope.